everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're delivered to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, and it's just me this week. Connor is in Boulder, Colorado, and it'll also just be me for the recap of the Colorado game whenever that happens. So I guess I should also say that Wunkus is right alongside me right now, sitting right in front of the microphone. So if you hear her little bell or if she starts shifting around, that's her. But before we get into this week's weekly recap, I do want to thank the sponsors of today's show, and that is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats supporters link, as well as the merch link, which are both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's just go ahead and dive straight into this week's weekly recap, where we have the basketball schedule to talk about the men's basketball, or at least their TV schedule, the preseason awards and predictions for the Big 12 basketball slate, as well as the volley and soccer cats. But let's just dive straight into the men's catsketball news. And I know I said that I would do the the TV schedule first, and honestly, some of that I'll save for Connor whenever we do our season preview, which I imagine would be sometime next week, because I know Connor is really, really passionate about the scheduling of things. But I'm just going to go ahead and start with the preseason awards. And in terms of K-State, there's really only the one preseason award, and that is the co-newcomer of the year, and that is Coleman Hawkins, the transfer from Illinois, now playing for K-State. He gets co-newcomer of the year alongside Baylor and Jeremy Roach. And yeah, he was also all preseason second team, all Big 12. And of course, Hunter Dickinson was voted as the preseason player of the year. And KU is, of course, the favorite to win the Big 12, which is funny considering that they didn't win it last year. Again, Wunkus is really trying to make her presence known right now. KU was picked first, 9 first-place votes, and then Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, Arizona, and then Cincinnati, Texas Tech. K-State picked at 8th, BYU, TCU, UCF, Arizona State, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Colorado, and Utah. So I wouldn't say that there's a lot in the way of big-time surprises. I mean, I guess maybe you could argue that Houston should have been probably the favorite, but it was only by 4 points that KU ended up being the favorite to win the conference. So again, it's not like it's this, massive snub in favor of, or rather against Houston, because, the Big 12 is it's a murderer's row when it comes to basketball. So, congratulations to Coleman Hawkins, and I wouldn't be surprised if K-State finishes around that area, though I do think they have pretty high expectations. That I think, honestly, the 8th place team probably isn't too far back from the 1st and 2nd place team. I think that a lot of the Big 12 is going to be a lot closer than people want to make it out to be, especially with, how a lot of home games end up breaking down. But that's it for the preseason awards. Now we can talk a little bit about game time, and really the only one that I particularly want to talk about is the snub for one of the games where K-State, and I think it was the K-State Arizona game, where they end up getting shoved onto ESPN Plus. And, whatever. Yeah, it was the K-State Arizona game. Ends up getting shoved onto ESPN Plus. Though my wonderful co-host Connor did ask on Twitter, he did ask Scott Wildcat whether or not they could flex that game if need be, and they can. So I would imagine that's a game that ends up getting flexed to normal ESPN. But in terms of notable big-time network performances, K-State gets Fox at 10:30 in the morning, December 7th at St. John's. And CBS Sports, they get that for Cincinnati and TCU on December 30th and January 4th, respectively. Get CBS again, or CBS Sports Network for all of those. Apologies for Texas Tech on January 14th. Big Boy CBS for the game in Allen on January 8th. ESPN2 or U for Baylor. CBS Sports Network for West Virginia and Oklahoma State on the 25th and 29th. Big Boy ESPN on 1 p.m. Weird, but obviously you prefer Big Monday, especially for a storied rivalry like Sunflower in basketball, but hey. And in terms of the final big-time game is the last game of the season up against Iowa State. That will be on Big Boy CBS. So a lot of prime billing for K-State. I don't want to say a lot, but a not insignificant amount of prime billing, at least on the major networks for K-State, which you do get a few confusing games on ESPN Plus, most notably the Arizona game, but you take what you can get, and some of those games honestly might end up being flexed anyway. So who's to say what the schedule actually ends up being, but this is sort of the preliminary schedule, so you'll rock with it and take what you can get. And really that's about it when it comes to men's catsketball, and it's going to be probably a pretty quick episode to go over. But now we're going to move into the Volleycats, who have been on a little bit of a run lately after more or less being declared dead on arrival to open the season, where they end up reverse sweeping both of the teams that they ended up playing for this weekly recap. The first one being Iowa State, who was 8-5 going into this game, 2-0 in Big 12 play. K-State ends up beating them 3-2. That's what a reverse sweep means. Austin, yeah, great commentary there. But Iowa State takes the first two sets, 30-28 and 25-23. K-State ends up roaring back to take the last three, 28-26, 25-17, and then 15-10. So sort of roaring back into that momentum was really, really big. And that's, with some solid enough hitting percentages in the first, fourth, and fifth, 229, 208, and 263 respectively. And just making sure that Iowa State in those last sets did not hit very well. 0.132 and then 0 for their hitting percentages on both the fourth and fifth sets. In terms of notable performances, Aaliyah Carter had 19 kills, Meg Brown 14, Liz Grigorski with 13 as well. Aces, Ella Larkin led the team with 2, and then Lizzie Grigorski and Izzy Shulshevsky each had 1. Blocks, Brenna Schmidt had 11, Jordan Williams with 9, and Anaya Clinton with 6. Assists, Izzy Shulshevsky 31, Ava the Grand 20, Ella Larkin 7. And then Ella Larkin also had 23 digs, Ava the Grand 15 digs, and then Simone Sims 14. And this is a really important victory because, everything at the Big 12 at this point, where K-State is sort of unfortunately put themselves in a position where they need to be borderline perfect for the rest of the year, and even then it might end up not being enough for them to get any postseason chances. And yeah, that would require them to pretty much win out and probably dominate even a bit more than what they did in this match. But it is still good to pick up a victory in the first of the Farmageddon matchups this year, especially picking up that victory to pick up some momentum at home. But K-State actually managed to pick up a more impressive road victory up in the Fifth Thirds Arena in Cincinnati, where Cincinnati actually ends up getting reverse swept as well. Cincinnati went into this matchup 11-3 with a 2-1 Big 12 record. So a really solid Cincinnati squad that K-State ended up playing in their home court. Cincinnati picks up the first two by a score of 25-19 for both sets, and K-State ends up roaring back 25-22, 25-18, and then 19-17 in that last set. And it's sort of a very similar story to that Iowa State game, where it was a relatively slow start. Cincinnati hit pretty well, and then K-State just hits exceedingly well, especially in the third and fifth sets, hitting 464 and 323, which, yeah, that's a ridiculously good hitting percentage, and something that we haven't seen a lot of from the Volleycats this year. In terms of leaders, Aaliyah Carter, 20 kills, Liz Grigorski, 19, and Shaylee Myers with 11. Ava the Grand and Simone Sims each had 2 aces. Liz Grigorski had 1. Brenna Schmidt with 8 blocks, Shaylee Myers 4, Izzy Shulshevsky 3, And then Izzy Szulczewski with a ridiculous 51 assists in this game. The next most was Ava LeGrand with 6. And then Diggs, Ella Larkin, 20, Liz Grigorski, 16, and Izzy Szulczewski, 13. So Izzy Szulczewski ends up picking up a double-double this game, which, double-doubles in nearly any sport is something to applaud. And yeah, again, just a really, I hate to, sort of cut things short on the analysis here, but I'm not really a volleyball mind. That's much more Connor's realm. But yeah, this is a massively impressive victory, especially away from your home court and coming back from being down 2 sets to storm back into it. And it seems like the Cats have sort of picked up a little bit of momentum, and Aaliyah Carter has found her stroke a lot more as opposed to what it was earlier this year, which was a struggle, to say the least, for Aaliyah Carter, especially by her standards. But the next matches for the Volleycats will come at West Virginia on Sunday, and then at number 8 Kansas in Lawrence next Thursday. That, you always want to win the Sunflower Showdown, but I'm not exactly going to go out and say that I have the highest expectations for that game. But, Sunflower Showdown, weird things happen in just about all of the sports, like the random baseball year where like 40 runs were scored. But the Sunflower Showdown is always fun, so be sure to watch the Volleycats on ESPN+, especially because they've sort of been on a roll lately. I mean, they've won 3 of their last 4 matches, with the only exception being an admittedly clunker of a game down in Lubbock up against Texas Tech. But they've sort of found their footing, and this is about where they started finding their footing last year, especially at home. So maybe Mansfield teams are always just going to kind of be that team that finds and hits their stride towards the middle back end of the year, but still, you have to start finding it earlier if you're ever going to really have big postseason expectations. Hello, Wonk. What do you want? You just bouncing around? Yep, she's just bouncing around. That's her thing. Anyway, now we can talk a little bit about the Soccer Cats. And they've had 2 matches of their own. One up against Iowa State, who is sort of the other cellar dweller in the Big 12 alongside K-State, KU. K-State ends up walking away with a 0-0 tie in a match that it just wasn't fun, really. Iowa State entered this match 3-6-3, end up leaving 3-6-4. And again, there's not a whole lot in the way of notable moments in this game. It was 2 teams that notoriously have issues scoring goals, once again having issues scoring goals. It was very much stoppable force meets movable object. And despite that, K-State and Iowa State were actually even in terms of shots. Both had 18, though K-State had 3 more on goal with 7 compared to Iowa State's 4. And, of course, all of those shots were saved. And, again, not really a whole lot to say, other than this was perhaps the worst broadcast that I have ever seen. A lot of the Iowa State ESPN broadcasts are awful, especially in nonrevs. I mean, I remember their women's basketball broadcast last year being absolutely abysmal in Hilton, in one of the biggest games of the women's basketball slate of the year. And yeah, there's just another in a very long line of Iowa State ESPN Plus based L's, which is a very, very specific set of circumstances for which they have L's. But again, 0-0 tie for K-State. Ends up picking up a point for them for the postseason, but this was probably the most gettable match left on the schedule for K-State. And that sort of carries over into the next match, where K-State actually was tied with Utah in Boucher Family Park, 1-1 for, I believe, the majority of the second half. And then Utah in like the 86th or 87th minute ended up scoring the go-ahead goal, 2-1 Utah victory. And, again, This is another one where you would really prefer, obviously you'd prefer to win every single match, but this is another one where, especially because you were so close so late, you at least wanted to tie to pick up your point for Big 12 postseason play, but it just didn't end up working out that way. Though the goal for K-State was scored by Sophie Simmons, Utah obviously just ends up breaking away late. And this game was significantly easier and better to watch, but Utah ends up walking away the victor, and K-State can't pick up a point for postseason play. But that really leaves us with only 4 matches left in the soccer season. Connor and I kind of opined about this last week, where we realized that soccer's a really short season, where after Utah, we only have 4 matches left. That's versus BYU this upcoming Monday, at Arizona State at 9 o'clock Central, so that's going to be a really fun weekly recap to record at, 11 p.m. That's not normally when we record, by the way, if you can't tell by my two-minute voice. And then the last 2 matches will be at Arizona in Tucson and then up against KU October 25th. That is a Friday 2 weeks from now. So, I guess I'm not holding breath for postseason play, but I suppose it's possible. You just need to pick up at least one of those matches. Probably not going to pick it up against BYU. Probably your best shot is going up against KU because, again, like I said earlier, KU is sort of a fellow cellar dweller in the Big 12, especially in terms of soccer. But that's pretty much it for this week's weekly recap. Again, thank you for bearing with me because, Connor ended up going to Colorado. I imagine he's going to have a grand old time in Boulder. Hopefully he doesn't get batteries thrown at him, as Colorado fans are known to do. But that pretty much wraps up this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow me on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00. And whenever Connor gets back, be sure to follow him at Connor Balthazar, capital C, capital B. And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store and the supporters link, both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.